Our reading today is from the Gospel of Mark, the 9th chapter, verses 2 through 8. 6 days later, Jesus took Peter, James, and John and led them up a high mountain to be alone. As the men watched, Jesus' appearance was transformed, and his clothes became dazzling white, far whiter than any earthly bleach could ever make them. Then Elijah and Moses appeared and began talking with Jesus. Peter exclaimed, "Rabbi, it is wonderful for us to be here. Let's make 3 shelters as memorials, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He said this because he didn't really know what else to say. They were all terrified. Then a cloud overshadowed them, and a voice from the cloud said, "This is my dearly loved son. Listen to him." And suddenly, when they looked around, Moses and Elijah were gone, and they saw only Jesus with them. The word of God. Thanks be to God. So when I was in 6th grade, I got to go to Bible camp. Now I was a pastor's kid, so I had been waiting for my turn to go to Bible camp for a very long time, and now it was my turn. I got to venture off to Binford, North Dakota, to Red Willow Bible Camp. Woohoo! See, there we go. I'm not alone. I love it. And I must say it was a great week. We did all the normal camp things. We had chapel every morning and campfires every night. We learned new cool camp songs and did funny skits. And I had a great college-age counselor, who I don't remember to this day what her name is, and I made some good friends. But I will say the best part of that week was not all those things. It was this, that my faith came alive. It was kind of a magical week for me. You see, I'd grown up in the church and I knew all the churchy stuff. But there was something about camp, the way faith was integrated into our everyday activities, and I was with a whole bunch of other people doing the same thing, that made that story, that faith come alive in a new way. There in 1976 in Binford, North Dakota, I was transformed. I knew God in a way that I hadn't known God before. Now, camp can be one of those thin places. The concept of thin places is an ancient idea that has a history of varying points, but Christians have taken it on to mean this, that it's the time where the veil that separates heaven and earth opens just a bit, and it's a little more permeable. You see, the life that we have that's bound by time intersects with the life without time or unlimited time. It's a time when we live in those thin spaces, when we can experience God a little more fully, when healing might take place physically or emotionally, when our soul may be awakened, or those people gathered might be united in a more significant way. Thin spaces are marvelous and mysterious. They're ordinary and holy. They're the times when humans meet the divine in a beautiful way. If you've experienced thin places, you know what I mean. And if you haven't, they're a little hard to explain. Today's story, the Transfiguration, is, I think, a story of a thin place, a moment when heaven and earth meet, when the past and the future break in to the present, and the disciples are in awe. Their jaws drop and they're speechless. Why? Because they have come face to face with Jesus, transformed, and two very significant religious figures. Moses, the one who received the 10 Commandments and who points them to the law that they are to follow, and Elijah, one of the prophets, a prophet who in his time continually reminded people when they went astray to turn their attention back to God. Now, when Peter finally finds some words in this moment of awe, he resorts to freezing the moment, to wanting to create shelters for each one of these figures. These disciples have been invited with Jesus to leave the crowd, to leave their everyday teaching and healing that they've been doing, and to step out and to go up this mountain, to be alone with Jesus. Now, Jesus has just been asking people, who do people say that I am? And then he went from that to predicting his own death. It's been a little heavy time for him and the disciples. I don't blame him for wanting to take some time and get away from the crowds for a while in a solitary place. And there they are, away from the crowds, and that confirmation of who Jesus is becomes revealed. Indeed, Jesus is the Messiah, the promised one, the one they've been waiting centuries for. In that thin space, they all come to know who Jesus is. Now, thin spaces have a way of letting the noise of the world subside and helping us open our hearts and our minds to the beauty and belovedness that's always there, but that we don't always see. In these moments, we can redirect our attention from earthly matters to heavenly ones. Our questions and our doubts get to take a back seat to faith, which takes center stage. And this knowing of Jesus as the beloved Son of God, it's all-encompassing. It's not only that we know that this is God, but that we know that God's love is also for us and includes us. Now, a week at camp or hanging out on a mountaintop with Jesus are just two thin spaces. Oftentimes, thin spaces come in different forms. Sometimes those are extreme times of grief or sorrow. Or they can be ordinary moments that become transformed into holy ones. For example, if you walk with someone through a long illness or someone in the process of dying, you know what I mean by thin spaces. Accompanying someone in those times is a sacred journey. I've accompanied a few people in those journeys, most recently, my mother-in-law. And I'm shocked at how the holy breaks in to the mundane, the everyday and ordinary, and somehow everything changes. I've also found myself on more than one occasion sitting having dinner with a friend or having a phone conversation with someone when suddenly our conversation takes a turn. As together they or we are trying to make spiritual sense of whatever's happening in our lives. That table, that phone call turns into holy space. where the human and the holy are woven together. I have a truth to tell you that you probably already know. Our lives are finite. At some point, we will all breathe our last, and our bodies will shut down. And our stories will only live on through the memories that people around us share. Yet, there's also another reality. As people of faith, we are connected to a larger story. And that story is not bound by time, or at least Chronos time. And in that way, our lives don't ever end. And our final breath, nor our first, are what define us. You see, as Christians, we live in dual time. And that dual time is what makes thin places possible. It allows us to mourn and have hope all at the same moment. To laugh and to cry, to question and to be assured. It's these two types of time that allow ordinary elements of life to coexist with holy, sacred moments that are eternal. It is what makes water, bread, and wine, the elements of the sacraments, more than human rituals. As thin time plays with our view, as thin spaces play with our view of time, our own story is woven into a larger story. And we get connected to those that have come before and those that will come after. In thin spaces, we have a special way that we get connected to those ancestors and descendants. So this past month, as our family walked with my mother-in-law, Pat, to her death, we lived in the midst of a lot of thin places for over a week. As we said our goodbyes and entrusted her to God's care, we followed Jesus into that memory care room, and we dwelt there for those days. We listened to her breathing, and we watched for signs of whatever was going to come next. We told stories about the past that enlivened our conversations as giggles of our 7-month-old granddaughter, her great-granddaughter, interrupted us in a joyful way. The CD player in her room played old hymns, favorites for many of us. The same time that grandkids shared stories that they had learned from their kindergarten teacher, Grandma. We read Psalms that reminded us of God's promises as she wore her ladybug t-shirt, which was a joy for all of us and brought smiles to our face. Tears and laughter, sorrow and joy, all of that held God's promises, and all of those things were present in that room. Living hope is what I'd call it. The past and the future broke into that present moment through song, through stories, through the giggles of a little one. We didn't see Elijah or Moses or Jesus transfigured in that room. But we did know that God was present, uniting us, comforting us. And we could confess with certainty that Jesus was indeed the Christ, and God is the one in whom we can put our trust. I get why Peter wanted to build 3 shelters, why he wanted to capture that moment on the top of that mountain. There's a sweetness, a holiness, an assuredness that we humans want to know that God is God and we get to be in God's presence. These thin spaces are too rare in our lives, so it's natural that we want to bottle them up for later. But here's the deal. In the chapter before the story we read today, as Jesus was asking people, who do you say that I am? Peter jumped in and said, yes, you are the Messiah, with confidence. Now, 6 days later, he's seen with his own eyes that this is true. Jesus is the Messiah, God's beloved Son, and they should listen to him, God says. But it won't be long for Peter or for any of us that as we face the trials and tribulations of our faith that we're tested, and that confession isn't so bold and confident. It was hard to drive away from camp as a sixth grader, because even though I didn't have words, I knew in my being that life was going to be different when I left. It was even harder to walk away from Pat's room the night that she died. In both of those spaces, I could say with confidence who I knew Jesus to be, and that Jesus was the one in whom I could put my trust. It is the veil comes back together and closes as we return to the world from those dim space times. We still are bound and connected to this greater story that is eternal. This week we enter into the season of Lent, a season that we personally and collectively get to ask the question, who do you say that I am? And be connected to this larger story of God's people. We, as communities of faith all around the globe, will gather in midweek and in other times to celebrate and reflect on this reality. I cannot guarantee that they will be thin spaces, but I can guarantee that they will remind us of the big past of the story that we're a part of, and that there is a future that is a part of this story. And they will come directly into our present, wherever we are. So my challenge for you this week, this coming Lenten season, is to take some time to follow Jesus into some space where you can reflect on this question. Who do you say that I am? And that you may come to know that not only is Jesus the Christ, but that you are God's beloved child. Amen.